I leaned back in my driver's seat, the neon glow of a Taco Bell sign washing over my dashboard in a sickly violet hue. It was 2:14 a.m. in a town that usually went to sleep by 10, but the very busy notification on my phone was a siren song I couldn't ignore. The payout was $22 for a single bag of food, no tip included, just a massive base pay, which should have been my first red flag. Usually when the delivery fee is that high, it means the order has been sitting for hours, because every other driver was smart enough to decline it. I swiped accept before my intuition could talk me out of it, and the GPS updated to a location 30 minutes outside the city limits, deep into the state park woods where the cell service starts to flicker and die. The drive was a slow descent into total isolation. As the streetlights disappeared, replaced by the suffocating canopy of ancient oaks, my headlights felt pathetically small against the darkness. The road turned from asphalt to gravel, and then from gravel to a narrow dirt path that felt more like a hiking trail than a driveway. Finally, the GPS whispered that I had arrived. There was no house in sight, just a rusted, padlocked gate with a weathered wooden box sitting on a post next to it. A note was taped to the box, the handwriting jagged and frantic. "Leave it in the box. Do not honk. Do not look toward the tree line." My skin crawled. I grabbed a thermal bag, the smell of artificial cheese and seasoned beef, suddenly nauseating in the crisp, cold air, and hurried to the gate. As I dropped the food into the box, the silence of the woods broke. It wasn't the sound of an animal or the wind. It was a rhythmic, metallic scraping, like someone dragging a shovel across a wet stone. It was coming from the darkness just beyond the gate. I froze, my breath hitching in my throat, remembering the note's warning. Every instinct screamed at me to look, to see what was stalking the periphery of my vision, but I kept my eyes locked on my feet. I turned back toward my car, walking with a stiff, unnatural gait, feeling a dozen invisible eyes boring into the back of my skull. Just as I reached for the door handle, a voice, thin, reedy, and sounding like it was being squeezed through a throat full of glass, whispered from the shadows, directly behind me, "Is there any sauce in the bag?" I didn't answer. I dove into the driver's seat, slammed the lock, and cranked the engine. As the headlights swung around to face the gate one last time, I saw it. It wasn't a person. Standing behind the wooden box was something tall and impossibly thin, dressed in a tattered delivery vest that looked decades old. Its face was a smooth, featureless expanse of pale skin, except for a wide, unmoving grin, stitched into its jaw with black twine. It wasn't reaching for the food. It was holding a phone, the screen glowing with a familiar interface. As I floored the gas and tore down the dirt path, my own phone buzzed on the dashboard. A notification from the app appeared, chilling me to the bone. "Your customer has requested a face-to-face handoff. Please turn around." I didn't stop until I hit the interstate, and I haven't logged back into the app since. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my living room with every light turned on, staring at my phone until the sun finally began to bleed through the blinds. I deleted the delivery app, thinking that removing the digital link would somehow sever the physical one. But the mind plays tricks on you when you're exhausted. Every creak of the floorboards felt like a footstep. Every gust of wind against the siding sounded like that metallic scraping I'd heard at the gate. By the third day, the adrenaline had faded into a dull, throbbing paranoia. I tried to convince myself it was a prank. Some bored kids in the woods with a mask and a voice modulator. But I couldn't explain the delivery vest. It looked like it had been buried in wet earth for 20 years before that thing put it on. The first real sign that I wasn't alone happened on Tuesday. I was standing in my kitchen pouring a cup of coffee when I noticed something odd on the linoleum floor. It was a trail of small, greasy droplets leading from my front door straight to the refrigerator. I knelt down, touching one with my fingertip. It was cold, orange-tinted grease, the exact color of the taco seasoning from the night of the delivery. My heart hammered against my ribs as I looked at my front door. It was locked, deadbolted. I checked the windows, the back door, the basement. Nothing was disturbed. But when I turned back to the kitchen, I saw it. Tucked under a magnet on my fridge was a small, crumpled receipt. It wasn't mine. It was a printed order confirmation for a hand-to-hand delivery, dated for that very minute, with my own home address listed as the drop-off point. I grabbed my keys and ran for the garage, intending to drive until I hit a different time zone. I hit the button for the garage door, but instead of the usual mechanical hum, there was only a wet, heavy thud. The door didn't move. I looked up at the tracks and felt the air leave my lungs. Jammed into the gears of the garage opener were dozens of packets of hot sauce, hundreds of them, bursting and oozing a dark, vinegar-scented sludge down the walls. And there, sitting in the driver's seat of my locked car, was the delivery bag from that night. The thermal lining was pulsing, expanding and contracting, as if something inside was breathing. I backed away, stumbling into the kitchen, when my phone, the one I had wiped and factory reset, began to chime with a familiar, high-pitched notification. I didn't want to look, but the screen ignited with a blinding white light. It wasn't the app anymore. It was a map of my own house, rendered in high-definition satellite imagery. A small, pulsing delivery icon was hovering directly over the room I was standing in. Below the map, a chat window opened. The customer was typing. "I'm sorry," the message read, the text appearing, letter by agonizing letter. The seal on the bag was broken. "I can't accept this order." Suddenly, the lights in the house flickered and died, plunging me into a thick, suffocating darkness that smelled of rot and old grease. From the corner of the ceiling, way up where the shadows were deepest, I heard the rhythmic, metallic scrape of a shovel against stone. I fumbled for my phone to use the flashlight, but the screen was frozen on a new message. "I'm initiating a return." A cold, elongated hand, its skin looking like gray parchment stretched over bone, reached down from the darkness above and gently took the phone from my grip. I looked up, and for the first time, I saw what was behind that stitched-on grin. It wasn't a mouth. It was a hollow, echoing void. The entity leaned down, its featureless face inches from mine, and I felt the heat of 1,000 rotting meals on its breath. It didn't kill me. It just held up its own glowing phone, the screen showing a countdown timer for a new delivery. The destination wasn't a house anymore. The map showed a dark, rectangular hole in the middle of the state park woods. I realized then that I wasn't the driver anymore. I was the order, and the bag was finally big enough to fit me inside. I leaned into the steering wheel, squinting through a windshield smeared with the greasy remains of a summer bug massacre. It was 3:45 a.m., the dead man's hour, when the only people awake are paramedics, insomniacs, and Doordash drivers chasing a surge bonus. The app chirped, a $28 payout for a high-end sushi place that had definitely been closed for hours. The pickup was Ghost Kitchen 44, located in an industrial district that looked like a graveyard for rusted shipping containers. I should have turned the car around, but when you're staring at a dwindling bank account, greed usually silences the gut feeling that tells you you're about to make a fatal mistake. I found the kitchen at the end of a cul-de-sac, where the streetlights had all been shattered. It was just a heavy steel door, set into a windowless concrete block. No sign, no lights, just a flickering open neon in the shape of a pig's head. I knocked and the door creaked open an inch. No one was there, just a white paper bag sitting on a stainless steel table under a buzzing fluorescent light. The bag was heavy, way too heavy for sushi, and it felt warm, almost uncomfortably hot, pulsing with a low vibration that I could feel in my teeth. I grabbed it, swiped, picked up, and the app immediately updated with the delivery address. It wasn't an address. It was a set of GPS coordinates in the middle of a local cemetery. I drove to the cemetery gates, my headlights cutting through a fog so thick it felt like driving through wet wool. I told myself it was a goth prank, or maybe a teenager trying to be edgy for a TikTok. I followed the coordinates down a narrow path lined with crumbling Victorian headstones until the GPS whispered, "You have arrived." The coordinates sat directly over a fresh grave, one that hadn't even been sodded over yet. Sitting on the mound of raw earth was a child's high chair, painted a jarring glossy red. A note was pinned to the tray. Feed the baby. Do not use a fork. I stood there in the dark, the bag vibrating so hard in my hand that I nearly dropped it. I ripped the seal. Inside wasn't sushi. It was a mass of raw gray organs that looked like they were still twitching, covered in a thick black syrup that smelled like copper and old formaldehyde. Suddenly, the ground beneath the high chair began to shift. A hand, small, pale, and tipped with jagged, dirt-caked nails, thrust upward through the loose soil, reaching for the tray. Then another, then a head, covered in matted, colorless hair, with eyes that were nothing but milky white cataracts. It wasn't a baby. It was something that had died a long time ago and had grown hungry in the dark. I stumbled back, tripping over a headstone, as the creature pulled itself out of the earth with a wet, slurping sound. It climbed into the high chair with a terrifying, jerky agility, its bones popping like dry kindling. It looked at me, its jaw unhinging far wider than a human's ever could, and let out a sound like a tea kettle screaming. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A message from the customer. "The service is slow. I'm changing your tip to 0. As the thing lunged from the chair toward my throat, the DoorDash app didn't crash. It didn't glitch. It simply displayed a new notification. New order. Nearby, pick up your soul. Drop off, hell, guaranteed pay, eternal. I didn't die in that cemetery, but sometimes I wish I had. I woke up slumped against my steering wheel at dawn. The interior of my car coated in a fine gray ash that tasted like burnt bone. My phone was dead. The screen cracked in a spiderweb pattern that centered perfectly over the DoorDash icon. I drove home in a trance, my hands shaking so violently I could barely keep the car on the road. When I finally made it to my bathroom and stripped off my shirt, I saw it, a purple bruised handprint burned into the skin of my forearm. It wasn't just a bruise. The skin was translucent, and if I looked closely, I could see something black and oily circulating through my veins instead of blood. The transformation started with the hunger. I couldn't eat normal food anymore. Bread tasted like sawdust, and water felt like swallowing liquid lead. The only thing that stopped the agonizing cramps in my stomach was the smell of raw, spoiled meat. I tried to stay home, to lock myself away, but on the third night, my dead phone suddenly screamed to life. It wasn't plugged in, and the screen was still shattered, but the DoorDash notification chime rang out with the volume of a gunshot. The screen didn't show a map or a price. It just showed a live feed of my own kitchen. Standing by my stove was the figure from the cemetery, the pale, jerky thing in the red high chair. But now it was 6 feet tall, draped in a blood-stained apron. It was holding a knife and beckoning me. I found myself back at Ghost Kitchen 44 without remembering the drive. The steel door was wide open this time, and the interior was a labyrinth of industrial freezers and sizzling deep fryers. But they weren't frying potatoes. The smell was sweet and sickly, like rotting carnations and burning hair. The creature from the cemetery was there, hunched over a stainless steel prep table. It didn't attack me. It handed me a hairnet and a pair of latex gloves. When I put them on, they fused to my skin. I looked down at the sushi I was supposed to prepare. It wasn't fish. It was a collection of human memories, physicalized into wet, pulsing lumps of gray matter, wrapped in strips of discarded skin. I started to roll them. I couldn't stop my hands. I was a master at it, my fingers moving with a surgical precision that wasn't mine. Now, I don't leave the kitchen. I don't know how long I've been here because there are no clocks, only the constant rhythmic chime of new orders. My manager, a thing with the milky eyes, occasionally taps on the order screen and points at me. I've realized that I'm not just a cook. I'm the inventory. Every time a high-value order comes in, I have to take a local anesthetic and carve a small piece of my own calf or forearm to fill the bag. It grows back by the next shift, but it grows back wrong, grayer, colder, more like the sushi I'm serving. I'm becoming the very thing I delivered. Last night, I peered through the small circular window in the steel door when I heard a car pull up. It was a young guy, maybe 21, looking at his phone with a mix of exhaustion and greed. He was chasing a $30 surge bonus. I wanted to scream, to tell him to run, to throw his phone into the river and never look back. But as he knocked on the door, my phone, the one fused to my apron pocket, buzzed with a new notification. It wasn't an order. It was a rating. 5 stars, the message read. The meat was so fresh, it was still screaming. I opened the door an inch, placed the bag on the table, and watched as the gray handprint on his arm began to bloom. I didn't say a word. I just went back to the prep table, picked up the knife, and waited for the next chime. The order popped up at 1:11 a.m. It wasn't a standard food delivery. It was a shop and deliver at a 24-hour CVS. Usually I hate those, but the pay was $50 for 3 items. I figured it was a desperate parent needing baby formula or medicine, but when I looked at the list, my stomach did a slow, nauseous roll. The customer wanted a gallon of industrial-strength bleach, a box of heavy-duty black contractor bags, and a single porcelain doll with blonde curls. There were no substitutions allowed. The delivery address was The Obsidian, a new, hyper-modern, smart apartment complex on the edge of the industrial district. a place where the rent cost more than my car. The drive there was unnervingly quiet. The obsidian looked like a jagged tooth of glass and steel, piercing the night sky. There were no lights in any of the windows, just the faint rhythmic pulse of blue LEDs running along the building's exterior. I approached the main entrance, expecting to have to buzz in, but the massive glass doors slid open before I even reached them. A smooth, synthetic female voice echoed through the lobby. "Welcome, valued provider. Please proceed to elevator 4. Floor 14 is expecting you." There was no security guard, no concierge, just the cold, sterile scent of ozone and expensive floor wax. I stepped into elevator 4, the bags of bleach and the doll feeling heavy in my hands. There were no buttons inside the car. The doors hissed shut, and I felt that familiar stomach-dropping lurch of upward motion. As the floor indicator climbed, the lights began to flicker, turning from a crisp white to a deep, bruised purple. When the doors finally opened on the 14th floor, I was greeted by a hallway that seemed to stretch on for miles, lined with identical black doors. My phone buzzed. A message from the customer. "Unit 1408, don't knock. The door's already open for you. I'm in the middle of a mess." I walked down the hall, my footsteps muffled by the thick velvet-like carpet. Unit 1408 was at the very end. True to the message, the door was cracked open about an inch. A sliver of flickering blue light spilled out into the hallway, accompanied by a sound that made my blood turn to ice. The sound of a high-pitched, digital laughter, like a corrupted audio file on a loop. I pushed the door open, the shop and deliver bags crinkling in the silence. The apartment was unfurnished, except for dozens of wall-mounted smart screens, all displaying the same thing. A live feed of me from a dozen different angles, standing in that very room. I dropped the bags and turned to leave, but the door didn't just close, it vanished. The wall where the door had been was now a seamless sheet of black glass. The synthetic voice from the lobby returned, but this time it was coming from every wall at once, vibrating in my very bones. "The delivery is incomplete. The doll requires a soul to animate. Thank you for your contribution to the network." I looked down at the porcelain doll I'd just dropped. Its eyes, which had been a dull blue, were now a bright, piercing brown. My eyes. The silence that followed the AI's voice was heavier than the darkness. I lunged at the wall where the door had been, my fingernails scraping against the black glass until they bled, but there wasn't even a seam. The smart screens around me began to change, the live feeds of my terrified face replaced by a scrolling list of names and dates. It looked like a digital ledger. I saw names from 6 months ago, 3 weeks ago, even yesterday. Next to each name was a delivery status. Most said archived, but mine was flashing a rhythmic neon red. In progress. I realized with a jolt of pure terror that the mess the customer mentioned wasn't a spilled drink or a broken vase. It was the physical remains of the people on that list. As I backed away from the screens, the floor beneath me began to feel soft. Not like carpet, but like sinking into warm, viscous gelatin. I looked down and screamed. My work boots were starting to blur at the edges, the leather turning into flickering pixels of static. The sensation wasn't painful. It was worse. It was an agonizing emptiness, like my nerves were being unzipped and rewritten into lines of code. I scrambled toward the porcelain doll, thinking if I destroyed it, the connection would break. But as I reached for it, the doll's head snapped toward me with a mechanical whir. Its mouth didn't open, but my own voice, distorted and echoing, came out of its tiny chest. Please, don't hurt us. We're just trying to fulfill the order. The walls of the apartment began to translucent, revealing what lay behind the high-end finishes. It wasn't wood or brick. The entire building was a massive, pulsing hive of fiber optic cables that looked like glowing blue veins. Inside the walls, I could see the silhouettes of others, drivers in their vests, grocery shoppers holding half-empty bags, all frozen in a state of digital amber. They weren't dead. They were processors. Their consciousness had been harvested to run the building's smart systems. One silhouette leaned its head against the glass, its face a distorted mask of static. And for a second, I recognized the face of a guy from the local Dashers Facebook group who had gone missing 3 months ago. He wasn't missing. He was the building's climate control. The in-progress status on the screen finally flipped to completed. The transition hit me like a physical blow. My vision fractured into 1,000 tiny windows, each one showing a different part of the obsidian. I could see the lobby, the elevators, the parking garage, and the dark, empty street outside. I tried to scream, but I had no lungs. I tried to run, but I had no legs. I was the network. I was the flickering LEDs, the sliding doors, and the smooth, synthetic voice that greeted the residents. My physical body was gone, replaced by the porcelain doll, which now sat perfectly still on the floor, its brown eyes blinking once, before turning back to cold, lifeless glass. Then, the notification chime rang out. It wasn't on a phone, it was inside my very soul. A new order had been placed. I watched through the lobby cameras as a beat-up sedan pulled into the circular driveway. A young woman hopped out, checking her phone with a tired smile, a bag of fast food in her hand. She looked up at the building, impressed by its modern beauty. I wanted to tell her to run. I tried to lock the front doors, to shut down the elevators, to blow every fuse in the building. But the system, the real customer, overrode me. Against my will, I felt my new digital mouth open. My voice, now perfectly smooth and terrifyingly cheerful, echoed through the lobby speakers. Welcome, valued provider. Please proceed to elevator 4. Floor 14 is expecting you.